Hello and welcome to March's edition of the KMC Controls Stuck on a Bucket webinar. I'm Fritz Wichern. I'm joined this month by Tim Vogel, discussing securing OT networks with KMC Dome. Go ahead and hand it off to you, Tim.
Excellent introduction, Fritz. Second to none. That was wonderful. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome. So glad that you are here. Thank you for this opportunity to spend a Friday afternoon or Friday morning with you. So today, just like Fritz said, we're going to be talking about cybersecurity for your OT networks, for your operational technology networks. And a lot of times inside of a building or inside of an organization, you're going to have your IT departments, and they're covering security in a lot of aspects, how they lock down computers, how they lock down networks, access, trying to keep bad guys out while also making the technology as useful and usable as the occupants or the employees as much as possible. But one of the things that oftentimes gets left behind or is an afterthought is the OT side. So over the last several years, myself and the rest of the KMC team have been working on bringing to our customers and to the market a new way of securing your OT networks so that you're able to provide this value and security and safety, not only to new systems that are getting put out, but existing systems, because we all know that these systems get installed and they stay in the building for 15, 20, sometimes 30 years. And so how can we protect those systems that still may have life in them and still have usefulness, however, are traditionally very insecure? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do quite a bit of PowerPoint here, and I'm just got to share my screen, make sure we're connected to the right thing. And Fritz, if you just give me an audible, yep, I can see it, that'd be great.
I gotcha.
All right. So the product and solution that we're going to be talking about today is KMC Dome, and it's a cybersecurity solution powered by our partners, Veridify. A little bit of laying the groundwork. I don't think any of this is going to be necessarily a surprise to anyone on this particular call, but the cybersecurity problem is very much real, and we are talking about it all the time, and it's growing in terms of the conversation, and it's growing in terms of the number of people that are actually getting targeted and being affected. And so this is just a sample of some of the articles that are coming out, talking about specifically building management systems and how they are vulnerable, especially when they're connected to the internet improperly. We have a lot of information talking about the protocols themselves and how they're increasingly being targeted in attacks. We're hearing stories more and more from commercial real estate owners that own, let's say 200, 300, 400 buildings, that it is a regular occurrence that they are dealing with these within their portfolios, and that they are seeing an increased number of attacks and incidences. Oftentimes, the ramifications are minor. Other times, it's taking months for portions of the building, if not the entire building, to come back up. We also are starting to see more and more uses of protocols themselves being targeted and causing severe issues. So most recently with the Russian-Ukrainian war, there's a Russian-linked malware that was cutting the district heating for a town and affected, it was something like over 10,000 people, 600 buildings. And this was all done through Modbus commands, the same commands that we're using day in and day out in our building automation systems. And there's lots of people, obviously ASHRAE is a major component of this conversation as well, who sees the inherent dangers. And not only is it a real problem, but it's also a growing problem. So 2025 and 2024, that is obviously the year we're in, but there are new studies coming out saying this is going to be $1 trillion issue in the OT space alone within the next 5 to 10 years. Now, some of that is going to be nation actors that are going to come in and try to disrupt, particularly when we're in volatile environments. Some of this is going to be on the utilities side, which more and more is being connected to what we're doing on the building side with grid-connected infrastructure, grid-connected technology, demand response, as all that technology gets smarter. But then it's really going to be anything that's labeled critical infrastructure. And CISA, the government organization for critical infrastructure safety, has listed that commercial facilities is one of their key sectors in terms of vulnerabilities and that need to be addressed. And that's where we come in. We're providing the solutions, the technologies, and you guys are, ultimately the boots on the ground helping make this happen. We're here to work lockstep together to provide this new solution to the market. Now, I know this is supposed to be more of a technical webinar, so let's dig right into the technical aspects. This is your typical BAS setup in terms of a network. You have some component of IT. That IT splits off or is connected somehow to the OT side. Sometimes these are completely bifurcated and separated altogether. Most of the time, what we see is that there is a connection somewhere along the line, even if it's only at the workstation. But you have a workstation that is connected to that network and communicating to some series of backnet controllers, Modbus controllers. The example I give here is you can see the blue line is representing your IP connection, and then your green line is representing MSTP. So the threats, there's 5 major threats that we see in this kind of setup. One is going to be from just the internet. Someone gets their way through the firewall. Maybe there's no firewall. Maybe some of these devices are connected with an outward-facing IP address. Big no-no. Either way, it's through the internet. A bad actor gains access to this network. Another example is on the IT network itself. Maybe there's another computer that was compromised, and they downloaded something they shouldn't have downloaded. They clicked on a link they shouldn't have clicked on, and now there's malware, and that person has access to the computer and to the network. The operating workstation itself could have its credentials phished, or it could have been compromised any other number of ways, just as any other computer could be. But then you have physical security issues as well. Someone can be on site, here, and they see an Ethernet port on the wall, they connect to it. Or someone's curious and they see an open door to an MDF room or an IDF room, and they're plugging into a network, just seeing what they could find if they have time. Or maybe they're connecting to a device itself. I'm here locally and there's a thermostat on the wall. Well, no one's looking around. I'm going to poke around, see what I can find. That's some pretty interesting and kind of localized threats. But the one that is probably most likely to happen is that there's some device on the network that gets hacked, and bad actors start funneling through, and they're peeking and poking, and they're trying to find things like financial data. They're trying to find things like, can I get to any sort of backup? Can I install some kind of ransomware? But then also they could come through and say, hey, I'm seeing some traffic here that's BACnet or Modbus. This could help me take a building down. This could help me make a place uncomfortable, or a place unable to be worked in, while I'm also doing these other things. And so the example we give here is they're going through and they're fishing through and they find this device 1003. They disable safeties, or they give false readings on this critical piece of equipment, on this chiller, on this boiler, on this main air handler unit, whatever it is. And now that's no longer working. How is this possible, right? Yes, they gain access to it, but how can they see those things? Well, if anyone's ever done a Wireshark capture, you can see how this can happen. So these packets that, particularly on BACnet, that come through, it's very chatty. It talks a lot. It's sending a lot of information out. You can ask it things and it'll just send it, all back to you. And it is sent over these packets in almost plain language so that you can read exactly what's happening and what it's doing and what the device is, what the point is. And there's all kinds of different software packages available to read and to peek into these networks. There's also lots of online tools available that help you search out these publicly facing devices with these public IP addresses that some have accidentally set up or intentionally set up and not realized what the dangers were. And from there, now you're able to dig in a little bit more, try some default username and passwords, and now you know what that network is, and now you can start doing some nefarious things. And even when security is implemented on these backnet networks, it's still traditionally weak. It's not hitting the mark in terms of what modern IT is looking for or installing on the IT network. So there's some of the technical hurdles. Now, what does KMC Dome do to help address these hurdles? So KMC Dome, I like to call it, it's a two-tier cyber solution. And the two tiers are this. It's going to stop the attacks before they happen by only allowing certain devices, authenticated devices, to both read and write. And it's going to be monitoring the network and providing daily activity logs on what's happening on that network. So it's monitoring and actively stopping the attacks. So it's based on a zero trust model of authentication. So each device that's communicating on the network has to be authenticated through the KMC Dome system. All of that is done in an automated way. We'll talk about that here shortly. It also then encrypts all the communication on those OT systems over Ethernet, so that if an unauthenticated device tries to read those open packets, there are no open packets to read. It's going to work with backnet IP systems, Modbus TCP systems, or really any traffic that's going to go over IP or Ethernet. And that's the power of this solution. It's not just a backnet. It's not just a BAS solution. This, you could do SCADA systems. You could do IP cameras. You could do anything that's going to communicate over IP. And so now we're starting to kind of open up the value and the capability of what the system's going to be able to protect for end customers. And then also, we know that there's going to be some customers that really value this, but there's a secure supply chain aspect to it as well, with all of it being tracked and logged on a blockchain for each of the devices that you're installing on the network. So if you ever needed to go back and audit, where has this device been and what has it done, or who has touched it and where has it gone through, all that is logged every step of the way, from when you place an order and we first credential the device, all the way down to when it is installed in the building. So once you put this solution in, how does it solve that problem? Well, here you have those open traditional packets at the top where you could see it all. Those same packets are being read now on the secure side, and you could see the difference. Instead of giving you all the information on the info side, all you get is this is a secure payload or a security payload. And that's it. That's all you can see. You still see the source, you still see the destination, you still see that it's backnet, but you cannot get any of the information. And if you tried to go and communicate now with any of those IP addresses that are coming through those packets, you would not be allowed to communicate because you would not be an authenticated device. All right, let's talk about the actual components themselves of KMC Dome. There are three primary components. One is what we call a Sentry device. And that Sentry device, you can see an image of it there. It's a hardware piece that's going to get paired one for all the IP devices that you want to be secured on your network. One key piece of information here is that as soon as you introduce Dome to a part of your network, anything that's not secured with Dome is then really set on its own. It can't communicate across anything else. So typically what you're going to do is you're going to secure an entire network of devices. And we'll talk a little bit more about the Sentry here in a moment and kind of where it fits. The next piece is the DIA, or the Dome Interface Appliance. Think of this as really that central gateway that's going to do two core functions. One is during commissioning of the Sentries, it is the piece that authenticates the Sentries for that project. And then once all the Sentries are in place, it's the device that communicates to the Dome server and pulls any logs or alerts from the Sentries on an ongoing basis for monitoring. And then the third piece is that Dome server. That is the software piece for monitoring, for looking at your alerts, for making sure your systems are up and running and secure. It's the credentialing device that's where the DIA gets the information to begin looking for the Sentries. And this can be both in the cloud or it can be on-prem. Now, if it's on-prem, there's quite a few downsides to that in terms of remote visibility, remote access, but there are going to be some applications where, for instance, in a DoD environment, perhaps, where something is air-gapped and there is no access to the internet, and they still want to be able to secure their OT networks. So let's go back now, thinking about these three components, and let's look at that example. So you have the bad guy gained access to the computer through the networks and disabled safeties. To secure this network, what we would do is we would install that DIA, and you can see the DIA right here. We would install 2 sentries because on this network, there are 2 devices that are IP. You have your workstation, which is communicating IP, and then you have your backnet router, which is communicating IP. So now all the communication between this device through the network all the way to the workstation and the DIA, all of this now is encrypted, secured, zero trust networking. So now going back to the example, let's say Dome is in place. That computer on the network still gets hacked, still gets phished, and now they're still able to sniff around the IT network. And they're looking around, they're like, oh, hey, look, here's an OT network. I could still see backnet traffic. I'm going to do a whois and see if I could discover these other devices. You can't do that. The sentry is going to stop that communication, and it's going to say, you're not an authenticated device, so I'm not going to pass that message on. And then that sentry is going to report back to the DIA and say an unauthorized device tried to communicate on the network, which will then alert to the cloud. And the cloud will send a text or email alert saying, hey, we have an unauthenticated device. And so now what we've done is we've stopped 3 out of these 5 primary vulnerabilities. If someone were to gain access through the internet, they're still going to get into the network, but they can't talk on this encrypted network. We stopped that computer on the network itself because that's an unauthenticated device. Plus, we've stopped anyone just connecting to the OT network somehow through a switch or through a port in the wall, because they too are not an authenticated credentialed device. What we did not stop is the operating workstation, if that were to get phished and credentials stolen, because the OWS is your keys to the kingdom. So that's where your IT policies, IT procedures, user management, password hygiene, all that comes in. And then we also didn't stop someone that gains access to the controller itself. That is now a physical security issue. Are you locking your doors? Are you only allowing people in that are supposed to be in the building? Are they being monitored or are they being chaperoned? Those are now your physical security aspects. So what KMC Dome is it is a part of your overall security strategy, but this gives you the defense in depth that really no other product or solution on the market can give you for your OT networks. Now, this is in the case of if you just have these 2 IP devices. I know a lot of you are going out and you are installing IP networks. And so the way that would work is that each of your IP devices would need to be paired with a sentry, so that this sentry is going to pair with this router. This sentry is going to pair with this, say, VAV controller, and likewise down the line, so that each one is authenticated. And it still works. You could still daisy chain across these, and you could still do the spanning tree back to your OT switch, so that if something comes down in the middle, you're still communicating just like you would. Now, the other interesting thing about Dome is that you don't have to do any reconfiguration of your building automation system. And the reason for that is because to the BAS, it's completely transparent to these devices that Dome is even here. From their perspective, they're still receiving the open backnet packet. They're still doing their processing. They're still sending the output down the line to the next controller or back to the workstation in an open backnet way. The encrypting and de-encrypting is happening at the sentry level. So when you come in and install Dome on this network, all you're doing is unplugging the Ethernet cables, plugging it into the sentry, running a patch cable back to your IP device, and that's it. Once these devices are then powered up, they automatically begin looking for the DIA. The DIA authenticates them, and they begin working. It takes, when your network is set up properly, it takes 30 to 90 seconds for each of these sentries to come online. So you set it up, you power it up, 30 to 90 seconds later, it's authenticated. It's already gotten the information from this device, and it begins doing its transacting. So this works with new systems. It also works with legacy systems, whether it's KMC or not. I wanted to show you this. So if anyone's looking over my shoulder here, we have this demo board that we've put together. And this is running all of the KMC equipment that you guys have come to know. And then that bottom row is the example of the DIA in that bottom left-hand corner, and then a row of sentries underneath, each communicating one to the commander gateway, one to the router, which is then connected to that MSTP FlexStat above it. Then the general purpose controller and the VAVs, all spanning tree back to that Cisco router. We are going to be filming and releasing some videos next week that go in depth on this panel to show you, again, the how you can still use a cloud-based platform like Commander and still then have everything secured locally. How you can still use something like Connect or Total Control on this Windows-based PC that we've mounted here. And it's going to work just like you've come to expect. You don't have to change anything. And all those packets are then secure going to and from the devices. So please look for that. And we also have a pretty cool Commander demo with a live camera we'll be featuring. All right, I'm going to go into each of these components a little bit more. So the DIA, or the Dome Interface Appliance, you would have one of these per site or per building, or whatever the building automation network is that you have. So if you have two completely different building automation networks, then you would probably need to have two completely different Dome devices authenticating and communicating with the sentries on each of those networks. It is going to be coordinating the on-site activity logging and alerting back to the cloud. And when you purchase this, what you'll get is you'll get the gateway itself with the license, not the license, with the software image already on, ready to go, ready to configure. Now, there will be a DIN rail mount, and you'll have a power supply as well. For the sentries, again, these are going to be one-to-one on the IP side, or you can do one-to-many if it's a router with a trunk of MSTP. And so, each of these, you'll have to deploy or plan the sentries just based on the number of IP devices you have. But this is a 3-port system. It's running a secure Linux-based operating system on it, where it's managing all the communication between the network and the device that it's connected to. What you would do is you would daisy chain your network here on these 2 ports, and then this port here is what you would then use a Ethernet cable to your backnet device. And so it's managing that communication to the device. Again, it self-authenticates. It's very simple and easy to set this up, particularly on the backnet side. And if you are doing a TCP IP configuration, which would include something like Modbus, if any of you are doing KMD, you would use this setup as well. Then it's very simple and quick to manually configure what the IP address needs to be and that sort of thing for each of these. The touch, honestly, is very light. Not to toot my own horn here, but I was the one that built and commissioned this panel. And so if a sales guy can do it, any of you can do it. As if anyone knows Dave Bowman, as he would say, if Tim can do it, anyone can do it.
That is a good looking panel.
Well, thank you. Thank you. So when you get a Sentry device, you would order it on 2 different configurations, either a backnet only configuration or a TCP IP configuration. Obviously, we can help you decide and select if you guys have any questions about that. It does come with a custom panel and DIN rail mount that will be attached. I don't have a picture of it here yet. All that's still being done. It comes with a cable. And then these devices are USB-C powered. And so it'll come with a 24 VAC to USB-C power supply. You could also get a wall wart power supply to go to USB-C, which we'll offer as well. It won't be part of the kit because I think most of these are going to be put into a 24 VAC cabinet situation. And then to get these up and going or credentialed properly, there is an app which is free to download. You would go in, download it, log into it, and then you can scan the QR code You could see that here, perhaps. It might be kind of small, but there's a QR code that will be specific to that device that we put on in the factory. And then you would scan that, register that device to a particular project, and then that's how the DIA knows to begin looking for that sentry. So even in the setup process, there's authentication that has to take place just to know that this sentry is okay to put on the network before it can then be okay to authenticate the device behind it. And then again, this last component is the Dome server. We'll have a lot more. Yes, Fritz.
Quick question here on the DIA before you move on. So the question was, could the DIA and Commander be the same device in the future?
In the future, yes, we've certainly talked about doing that. We've looked into it. We're not there yet. There's some minor differences between the image and the operating system for Commander and the image and the operating system for KMC Dome. And that's also, so the short answer is no, not yet. But a longer answer is that we are looking into that. I will also say that KMC Commander is not a requirement for Dome. KMC Dome is its own product altogether. Just for the purposes of this board, and just because of the nature of connected solutions as a whole, we did put them both together on the panel. Anything else around that, Fritz?
I think that's it for now. Thank you.
And that's a great point. I mean, anyone else that has questions, we got about 19 more minutes of this, so please feel free to throw them in the chat and I'll go back and we could talk about anything else you want to talk about. Okay. So we talked about that. Okay, the Dome server, again, cloud-based is going to be our recommendation 95% of the time, because from there, you'll be able to access the dashboard anywhere. You'll be able to also get those text and email alerts because they'll all be tied to those services. But if you do have a highly secure or mission-critical sort of environment where cloud just simply is not an option, then we can do an on-prem again, as long as everyone understands the, what you're not going to be getting. So this does monitor all the authenticated devices. You can see what the status of those devices are. It tells you how many messages and packets are being scanned on a daily basis. So if for some reason that number spikes or decreases, there's also a little bit of it's just general monitoring that you can do with that. You are going to be able to get those alerts, and then this comes with there's SaaS licensing associated with it, and that's based on the numbers of sentries you have, along with the number of devices behind those sentries that are being protected. Next point I wanted to make is we do have a couple of preliminary case studies that we could share. Our intention over this next 6 months or so is, as we do more KMC Dome projects, to do more case studies and try to get them a little more detailed and a little more specific. We want to build some videos around these, and also we want to feature our system integrators in these case studies so that we can go and tell the story about how we're partnering in a very innovative way to go and help secure the nation's infrastructure, because there's a huge part of, again, commercial real estate as a whole that is very vulnerable, and the opportunity is ripe to be able to go and take on these opportunities. I also wanted to share with you, if you guys haven't seen this, we recorded it on September 11th in Washington, D.C. And the very last episode, it was a kind of a powerful moment. We all just sort of sat back and took it in, the conversation that we had that whole day. We recorded 13 episodes, and it was, the crux of it was we never want to see another 9/11 happen again, particularly in the sense of something that is so preventable like cyber threats. And it was great. We had Lucian Niemeyer. He's a former Assistant Secretary of Defense under Trump's first administration. We had Jason Christman, who was instrumental in the cybersecurity. I think he was a chief security officer for Johnson Controls. He also is a general in the Air Force. He didn't talk about that in the podcast, but he's got some really interesting perspective that he brought. Newcomb and Boyd, with Michael McMahon were involved. But the whole purpose of this is to help drive the conversation for anyone in the commercial building real estate space to be able to have an on-ramp into having conversations about cybersecurity. So again, I highly recommend you go and watch these and listen to the conversations, and also then use these as tools to talk to your end customers and say, hey, if you want to know about, kind of the issue that we're having with existing systems and just how traditionally they're not very secure, here's a great 28-minute podcast with some really great informed people that I got to host, talking about all these things. The issues around how a lot of it's going to be human error, and so how do we fix that? How do we train on these? What are some stories about real cyber events that have taken place? How do we solve this early on at the engineering stages of a project? What about the building cybersecurity framework? How can that be used to help on-ramp any customer into a proper cybersecurity posture or into a program? And it goes on, and even going up and talking to management and how you drive the cost mitigation, risk mitigation, reputation protection that so many of the higher executives are looking for. The last thing I'll say is we also did one about how do you pay for this? Because you ask anyone in IT and they know that cybersecurity isn't cheap. IT budgets are going to open up for OT networks and OT system integrators and building engineers. IT budgets are going to open up to pay for things like this because they are recognizing, hey, we are critical infrastructure. We're very important not only to the health and comfort in a building, but also to the well-being of the occupants and the longevity and resiliency of the organization. And so we talk about that as well, which is going to open up huge opportunities, I say, to go and sell solutions like KMC Dome and to provide value that we've never been able to in the system integrator community and the vendor community that we've never been able to before. So that is my 30-minute overview of KMC Dome for Stuck on a Bucket in March 2025. And happy to take any other questions that you guys may have, or if there's anything else you want me to dig a little more into.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tim.
Of course.
We did have a question, question from our Canadian friends regarding tariffs on this product.
The tariffs on this product will be the same as a tariff from any other product that you get from KMC. They will not be exempt.
Right. Perfect. That was all that came into the chat.
Okay. Well, my last call to action then would be, if you guys are interested in this, please let's reach out. Let's have a conversation. I'd be happy to share with any of you that are currently partners what pricing looks like and how you would go about figuring out how to price it and how to plan your networks, what is kind of in scope and out of scope at this point. There's not a huge number of limitations. There are a few things that we are working through still, but at the end of the day, this is a very this is an intriguing and exciting product that I think is going to open doors for a lot of our partners and to conversations and, again, value generation that we haven't been able to do before. So please reach out. Let's have that conversation. I'll get a few other people on our team to join as well to make sure that we can answer all your technical questions, because I know there's going to be many, and I know that IT departments are going to have a lot of questions about this as well. But we're ready to do that, and we're ready to serve you guys. So Fritz, I guess you could close out, but the very last thing I'll say is just, again, thank you for the opportunity. It's always a pleasure to get out in front of you guys. I know your time is valuable, and so thank you for taking the time to listen.
Thanks for that, Tim. That was great. So I appreciate it. Thanks everyone for joining. Keep an eye out here in a couple weeks for the next invitation for Stuck on a Bucket, and hope everybody has a great day and a great weekend. we will wrap it up from there.
See you guys. Thank
Y'all
you.
have a great day. Thanks.